Okay, so within your life, this is about children's law. Now, children's law is very, very important in terms of understanding power dynamics because it is the only place in our political economy that we reflect on. We have a statutory responsibility to reflect on male violence, predatory behaviour, risk, all the things that have been brought up by the TERF business. This is where we have that, and the reason that is because the state has responsibilities to children that it cannot hold to adults. We do not intervene in adult power relations, not really, unless like it's a criminal matter, unless the person is extremely vulnerable, and then, as I'm going to cover in the next video, it's actually quite complicated, and we struggle then because adults have capacity, and we have to discuss capacity because that's really important. But with children's legislation, we are required, not just judges, not just people in the courts, but everybody. We've seen the working together guidance, we've seen how safeguarding is held up by a partnership between parents, professionals and government, and we've seen how there's a playlist earlier about family courts crisis which goes into incredible detail about the structure of these systems and the way that systems are joined together here. So, there is no mention in our children's legislation, first of all, of income, of money, not really, because we assume that it's in the context of a cash transfer system. It's written in the context of a cash transfer system, which means that people can meet basic housing costs and basic needs of their children, on the assumption that they can do that, that's linked here. And although it's not said explicitly in the legislation, and it's going to fucking need to be, that's assumed. And on that basis, we then can assume parental failure if needs are not met, which we do. Parents are the bottom line. Mothers are the bottom line. Over 90% of applications are mothers. Mothers are the bottom line. So our children's legislation is the only place where we reflect on these power dynamics and where, we are required to. So the Children's Act is really simple. It starts off with a bunch of principles, very, very simple to understand principles. Principle of no order, principle of confidentiality. These principles are shared among all professionals, and we all know them. Then there is a section for children in family proceedings. There's a section for local authority support for children and their families, children in need. There is a bottom line in this legislation that says if a child's needs cannot be met, the local authority have a responsibility to step in. You see that happening? Do you fuck? We then have a section about protection of children, which outlines, the basis of an investigation and da-da-da-da. We have a section on community homes, voluntary homes, registered children's homes. So that's all the children who are in these homes all over the country. We have one covering private fostering arrangements, which is where somebody is staying with somebody who is not their family, but who is not local authority either. And we have responsibilities there. Childminding and daycare. Secretary of State supervisory functions, miscellaneous, and it's been updated piecemeal and it's due for review to expand responsibilities to media, other institutions including policy making and politics because of the nature of the crisis. There's a welfare checklist contained within that everybody can recite off the top of their head. I'm going to place that underneath, and that's the core of all decision making. The legislation is easy enough for an 11-year-old to understand. Let me be clear, it has not been lawful in this country for a very long time, or in Europe, to create maternal poverty and rescue children from it, even though that's entirely what we've been doing for the last 8 years. What the fuck? This is not lawful. It hasn't been lawful since 2010. But policymakers, as we have discussed, are not even bothered that these systems exist, and have thought that if you just erode these institutions, they'll go away, and so will the children in them. And so all the predators that are taking advantage of holes in the system, and the 70,000 children that the state has parental responsibility for will just disappear, apparently. Because that's what children do if you just don't look after them, and if you just leave them vulnerable to predators, and if you erode the institutions and the protective functions, they just disappear. Anyway, the child abuse inquiry is playing out, and it's telling you that that's not really the case. And the combination of the child abuse inquiry, universal credit failure, local authority failure, and the scandals, the waves and waves of scandal from the last 8 years, and there are going to be waves and waves and waves, which will last for the next 20 years. These systems are fucked. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Now, these The children's legislation is contained within local authorities because there's a housing duty. There is also a duty within local authorities to make sure that housing duties and children's duties are linked. This is not happening. I would suggest you follow a Twitter account called Nearly Legal, and that's Giles Peaker from Inside Housing, who is the most fucking awesome housing mind you have ever seen in your life. And he will talk to you at length about this. Now, this is a place where institutions join together. We don't have magic balls to deal with, to detect child abuse. We have working together, and we have institutions join together, and we have social workers who know how to make institutions join together, who oversee and do this. And so what we've been doing is eroding the institutions, and that what's gradually happened is what's described in that playlist about the family courts crisis. I'm also going to give you a case study in a video but one, to give you an example of the true fucking horror that's been generated, that we've been living through in the last 8 years. These are responsibilities that cannot be abdicated, because children don't disappear. I don't know what to tell you. So now we're just in the process where crisis renews them. I always knew that that was the case. That was never anything but guaranteed. It was just a question of how and when, and it's a really disgusting process to watch. Now, I know that I'm connected to these systems, and my knowledge of them is a little bit away from what other people have. But actually, that's not what this is about, because the state trained me to know this. The state trains lots of people to know this. And what you've seen through the turf business is just how many people uphold these systems and know why we're doing it. And what you have is a belief system that says that these children can be eliminated if you just erase the institution. I don't know what to do with that. What would happen to me if I did that to my daughter? So, the only extra institutional representation these children had was Unison. And Unison said some cuts were okay as long as it was these ones. Even though they can't be delivered, they will only generate crisis, and those crises will involve 70,000 of the most vulnerable children in the country being very seriously harmed. And they are being seriously harmed. I don't know what to tell you about how predators use holes in systems. I was a looked after children's social worker, and I'm going to be honest with you, I had to accept that we cannot oversee the hodgepodge of private providers that we can't access. We haven't been able to for ages. None of the systems that protected me exist. And the level of training that's being social workers are, I don't know. I don't know how to speak about this rationally, because actually what I'm discussing is 70,000 children. So what's going to happen now is local authorities are going to fail, and these duties actually have to get to a national consciousness, which is happening through the child abuse inquiry. It's happening quite naturally. I'm absolutely confident there are enough signs of institutional resilience that this is occurring, but it's a major crisis. And we can't get away from the fact that the people who should have been mediators for this, The Guardian said that they were the voice of these systems. The Labour Party said they were the voice of these systems. And Unison and PCS said they were the voice of these systems. And they've just spent 8 years saying we are threatened by the existence of these systems and we will cause violence and harm if you discuss them. And they've all placed their entire identity on these children not existing. This was where the boot landed with austerity. This was entirely subject to political consensus. There didn't need to be any discussion because left and right had agreed that that was alright. I think Ellie Mae Hagan's first action to carve a niche as a blogger was to place a smear against me in the New Left project to punish me for discussing this. I don't know. How much do you want to be a blogger that you'd do that? Fucking idiot. It has not, I don't know what to tell you. Even if all that institutional failure wasn't happening, Brexit will open up this issue because it is not lawful. We will have to tease out these issues as Brexit forces us to examine these frameworks. But that's just one chunk of the duties. And what's been absolutely demonstrated clearly in the last 8 years is that the duties contained within the rule of law cannot be subject to political winds anymore because of the absolute indifference to them. And that needs to be addressed.